Story recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain an action, horror, science fiction, and thriller film called Morgan. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Through the view of a surveillance camera, Dr. Kathy Grief enters a secured room and prepares lunch. She calls Morgan, an artificial being with synthetic DNA, and invites her over for a meal. As Kathy sits down, Morgan examines her own hands curiously. Out of nowhere, Morgan pushes aside the plates on the table, jumps on it, and proceeds to stab Kathy. Luckily, two other doctors come inside to intervene and sedate Morgan. To further analyze the incident, Synsect, a genetic engineering company, decides to consult with an expert. A risk management specialist named Lee Weathers receives a call demanding her urgent response as an emergency happened in the company. After a long drive, she arrives at a rural area where Ted Brenner, the project manager, welcomes her. Ted offers her a tour of the whole place, but she politely declines, saying that they should get down to business. In the room, Lee meets Dr. Amy Menser, Morgan's behaviorist, and discusses their work field. Amy's friendliness is turned down by Lee's strict and severe demeanor, cutting their interaction short. Later, Lee comes down to the kitchen and meets the team nutritionist, Skip Vronsky. Afterward, Ted accompanies her to Kathy's room, where her recovery is being monitored. Lee asks if she could have a moment in private with Kathy to discuss the attack's nature immediately. Kathy is in a bad state as her eye is still patched, but she claims that she looks worse than she feels. According to her, Morgan used to be happy and gentle until the company decided to lock her inside the secluded room. Despite Morgan being the reason behind her wound, Kathy still holds her in high regard. Lee then meets Dr. Simon Ziegler, who leads the project known as L9. He explains the nature of the project and its creation and how synthetic DNA and nanotechnology are combined. After two failed experiments, their successful one so far is the creation of Morgan. Because of the rapid growth rate of the organism, Morgan could already walk and talk after a month of her so-called birth. According to Simon, Morgan is everything they have hoped for, a hybrid biological organism that can think and feel. After Morgan's first birthday, she already looks like a grown young woman. After, Simon shows Lee the incident footage and adds that Morgan was allowed exposure to the outside world at a young age, which the others think was a mistake. However, he still thinks that the project is gearing in the right direction with enough conditioning. Lee is toured inside Morgan's room to meet her personally. In a line of recent events, Lee is kept outside the room for protection. Morgan is polite and friendly during their first meeting, and she even apologizes repeatedly for hurting Kathy, claiming that it was unintentional. After the ones in charge of her leave, Morgan recalls a fond memory of her and Amy in the woods. Apart from everyone, she feels most comfortable with Amy, who treats her more like a sister than a prototype. At dinner, Lee joins the team for a meal and meets other members, Drs. Darren and Brenda Finch, who are a couple, and Dr. Louis Chang, whom Morgan considers as her mother. Lee is pleased to meet Louis as she thinks highly of her, and they even converse in the latter's language. She explains that her job is to assess risk against the company's profit, and she refers to Morgan as an object rather than someone who has feelings. On the table, they also discuss a similar project in Helsinki, in which prototypes killed 21 researchers. To the team's defense, Simon says that Morgan is much more advanced than the others. After the meal, Lee browses through old videos of Morgan to assess her behavior, but the computer glitches. To her surprise, Morgan looks directly at her intently through the surveillance camera, but she pays no mind to it. Later that night, Lee and Skip share a conversation over some drinks. He tells her that he and Amy used to have a fling in the past, which Amy overhears from a distance. Skip makes a move and kisses Lee not long after, but he apologizes for it right away, and the two say goodnight. Meanwhile, Amy walks over to Morgan's room to spend some time with her. She disables the cameras before approaching Morgan's cell to remind her about the psychological test tomorrow. Amy assures her that everything will turn out fine as long as she stays true to herself. The two of them lay their hands on the glass as an act of sisterly love and affection. To ease Morgan's worries, Amy tells her about the beautiful Lake Navarre, a place where she'll take her someday. Morgan gets a flashback of her and Amy out in the woods on one sunny day. Not far from their spot, Morgan sees an injured deer impaled on a branch and approaches the poor animal. After caressing it, Morgan suddenly breaks its neck as an act of mercy, which shocks Amy. The day of Morgan's psychological analysis arrives and is to be conducted by Dr. Alan Shapiro. He is supposed to sit outside the room while examining Morgan, but he thinks that the interaction will be pointless. Claiming that it is his job to build trust with the subject, Alan decides to enter the room despite the team's warnings. He sits across Morgan and is surprised that she knows his name and the reason for his visit. The first question Alan asks Morgan is the reason behind her sadness, to which she replies that it is about the incident with Kathy. At this point, Alan takes note of Morgan's remorse after doing something terrible. He then questions Morgan about her life inside the room and how she feels about being locked up. When Morgan says that she is pleased, he throws more questions that slightly make her tearful. In the middle of their conversation, Morgan fires questions about Alan's daughter, whom he seldom sees, a topic that catches him off guard. Alan loses his cool and starts raising his voice at Morgan while asking how she would react if he recommended the doctor's terminator. Unexpectedly, Morgan sheds a tear and reaches her breaking point after Alan's pressuring words. Morgan looks at her hands and pushes Alan against the wall, lunging at him. She bites hard into his throat and rips a chunk out, leaving the doctor bloody. The team is alerted by the commotion, and Darren attempts to sedate Morgan once again. However, Morgan uses Alan as a shield and advances at Darren, whom she knocks to the ground. When Lee tries to calm her down, the lights go out, and Morgan escapes in the blink of an eye. Lee quickly grabs a tranquilizer to prevent her from escaping. Outside, Morgan feels sunlight for the first time in months and sees Amy waiting for the evaluation results. With her face caked in blood, she feels a sense of comfort upon seeing Amy but is abruptly swept when Lee sedates her. Inside the lab, Morgan regains consciousness and apologizes for her actions. The team of doctors debates on what to do with her and what is best for the company. Cheng is certain of terminating Morgan, but Simon persuades her not to, as it will waste their years of work. Once they reach the final decision of getting rid of her, Simon sadly walks away, disappointed by the verdict authorized by Lee. The whole team gets emotional upon preparing the termination procedure, as Morgan has grown close to their hearts and has been a part of their daily routine. Morgan tearfully pleads with everyone in the room to not kill her, even calling Cheng mother, but she coldly says that she is not her mother. After sedating Morgan, Cheng apologizes for failing her and walks away. While she lays unconscious, Darren prepares the lethal injection but changes his mind and leaves the lab with Brenda. Without the medical team in sight, Lee decides to do it herself, but Ted stops her from doing so. Lee hits him in the face and holds him at gunpoint, but Amy shoots her with a sedative, causing her to doze off. As she regains consciousness, she finds herself locked inside Morgan's room while Ted stands outside. Lee commands him to let her out before the higher-ups arrive, but he ignores her. Amy, Ted, Brenda, and Darren gather supplies to get Morgan out of the lab safely. Amy tries to wake Morgan up, but she is too weak to respond, so Darren tries to sit her down. However, Morgan's personality shifts and she headbutts Darren in the face. While he is on the ground, Morgan grabs the lethal injection and sticks it in Darren's chest, ultimately killing him. Ted holds a gun to her face in an attempt to stop her, but Morgan manages to grab a pistol and shoots him instead. The wounded Ted makes his way back to Morgan's room, but she shoots him again as Lee watches. In an intimidating manner, Morgan turns to Lee to say that she feels like herself now that she is free. She cuts the conversation short and leaves Lee locked inside the glass room. Outside, Brenda instructs the clueless Skip to be ready to leave while she loads the supplies in the car. When Skip sees Amy walking alongside Morgan, he senses that something is amiss and runs back to the building to look for Lee. As Brenda reunites with Amy, she asks about Darren's whereabouts, but Amy could not utter any word at the moment. Morgan points a gun at Brenda from behind, but the doctor fights back and gets into a brawl with her. However, Morgan's strength remains unmatched, eventually beating Brenda to death. Amy is lost for words, but Morgan assures her that she is safe with her. Hungry for revenge, Morgan makes her way back to the house, where she sees Kathy, who tries to approach her in a friendly way. However, Morgan kicks her in the head until she dies. Meanwhile, Lee manages to escape by climbing to the top of the glass ceiling and breaking it. Outside, she sees Skip, still shaken by the devastating deaths occurring in the house, and instructs him to grab a weapon. While Cheng makes a video confession of the incident during Morgan's psychological analysis, Morgan enters her room and walks toward her. After Morgan gives her a kiss on the forehead, Cheng is suffocated to death, and her murder is caught on camera. In another room, Lee sees the lifeless Simon hung from a cabinet, an act that Morgan has also carried out. Upon discovering Cheng's corpse, Lee inspects the room for any signs of Morgan, who emerges from one of the corners to attack her. Both of them get into a brawl, taking turns throwing each other across the room. As the fight progresses, they accidentally throw themselves outside the window and land where Amy's car is parked. Skip tries to stop Morgan, but she knocks him down and drives out of the area. Determined to catch Morgan, Lee gets in her car as well and prompts a blood-pumping car chase through the woods. While driving, Morgan manages to bump Lee's car enough times for her to crash into a big tree. Though Amy begs for her to stop, Morgan continues to drive, utterly unmoved by the destruction she has caused. To Lee's luck, she survives the crash and is rescued by Skip, who claims to know where Morgan and Amy are headed. In the vast forest, Morgan and Amy find their way to Lake Navarre, a journey they awaited for so long. Despite Morgan's claims not to harm her, Amy remains vigilant and keeps a weapon with her. Upon arriving at their destination, Morgan sheds a tear of joy over the breathtaking view of the lake. For the first time in her life, she feels more alive than ever, experiencing the true freedom she craves. Meanwhile, Lee grabs Skip's rifle and goes to the woods to kill Morgan herself. She fires a shot, grabbing Morgan's attention, who also decides to return to the woods and fight her. When Lee gets a sight of Morgan, she fires a shot but misses. From behind, Morgan catches up on Lee and initiates another brawl in the middle of the forest. After numerous punches are thrown at each other, Morgan pushes Lee to a trunk where she gets impaled by a branch, just like the deer. To Morgan's surprise, Lee follows her back to the lake and pushes her into the water. She then proceeds to hold Morgan underwater until she drowns to death and leaves. Lee plants another kill by grabbing Amy's weapon effortlessly and shoots her before she kills Skip as well. The company head, Jim Bryce, discusses the incident to other board members and declares the project involving Morgan a failure. One of his associates asks about Lee Weathers, to which Bryce replies that she is perfect. After carrying out her mission successfully, Lee goes to a local restaurant and looks at her hands, a gesture similar to Morgan's. Unexpectedly, Morgan and Lee have far more in common than what is portrayed. Their same gestures and superhuman strengths demonstrate that Lee was once a prototype as well. It turns out Lee is just on an undercover duty to monitor the project and test Morgan's abilities against hers. It insinuates that just like Morgan, she is also bioengineered to carry out special missions that she can successfully ace on her own. With the associates discussing Lee's perfection, it is proven that she is a successful product of their modern technology and is their best asset so far.